But basically, I'm an ex-head teacher. I was head teacher of a special school in Taunton, and a school for boys with social and mental health issues. I was a teacher for 33 years, 12 of which were in special education, and 21 in mainstream education. A PE teacher by background, played a bit of cricket for Redcliffe in my time. I'm president of Old Bristolians Rugby Club, for those people in that neck of the woods. I work for Bristol Bears, so I'm an academy manager within the Bristol Bears setup. I run a centre in Weston-super-Mare. I'm the education lead for Bristol Bears, and I'm also the safeguarding lead for Bristol Bears. On top of that, whilst being semi-retired, I'm an education consultant specialising in helping people understand social, emotional, mental health and other disabilities that young people suffer from. I am the Gloucester Rugby Football Union safeguarding lead, and I'm also the mental health and wellbeing ambassador for Gloucestershire as well. And the mental health and wellbeing ambassador role came about because of my work within the special needs sector, and me identifying about 4 or 5 years ago that that mental health was a key priority. And as community clubs, we have a responsibility to support everybody and look after our community. And subsequent to that, I've done quite a lot of work with the rugby union. There are a number of different podcasts around the place, both on the RFU website and on other websites that I've been involved in, just talking through strategies on dealing with mental well-being. You're obviously all here today to support young people within the youth game, and that has been part of my role within the GRFU, but also within my club. So, you know, Old Bristolians, where I'm president, we've got a very large mini and junior section, 450 young people taking part on a Sunday. So their well-being is absolutely key. The pandemic has had a real impact on people's anxiety levels and people's well-being. And returning to rugby, you know, cricket's been quite lucky because you've had those 2 summer periods. Although we've all been affected, actually, you know, your season initially wasn't badly affected, and lots of boys and girls were able to get out on the cricket pitch and play. Rugby, obviously, we lost half a season, and right now within the game we are seeing more and more issues related to anxiety, which both through loss of players, but also through discipline on the pitch, and constituent bodies are seeing that. Anyway, I've prepared a presentation for you, which I'm going to take you through. I'm going to give about 15 minutes for questions at the end of it, so please feel free to chuck stuff in the chat box as we go forward. I'll pick that up by the end. Hopefully Steve will be able to monitor it for me as well. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to share screen now. Where are we? Okay. So, okay. Okay, everybody got that? Steve, you got that? Give me a yes.
Yep, all good.
Good, okay. So former head teacher, education consultant, as I've said, okay. Let's start here, okay, because most of the people on the call, look, judging by the pictures that I saw, would have been through an education system that was punitive, okay. And lots of people feel that actually punitive systems work. I'm one person who thinks it doesn't. And therefore this poster is really important, that you can't teach children to behave better by making them feel worse. When children feel better, they behave better. So let's start from that point of view. Okay, so this presentation is based on, from my opinion, from a specialist standpoint as a head teacher in this area. However, the context is taken from local and national perspectives. So I worked across Somerset, supporting people in schools for a long period of time. 12 years I was in Taunton running that school, okay, and I supported other schools in managing behaviour and understanding social, emotional, mental health as well. But also nationally, I am co-chair of an organisation called Engaging Their Future, which supports 120 specialist provisions across the country, and those 120 specialist provisions support mainstream schools as well. Okay, so I've talked to you about who I am. Okay. I'm someone who's learned more as a teacher in the last 11 years than in the previous 23, working in local secondary schools. Okay, and so let's just have a little think as we go forward here. So all behavior is a communication. Just have a think about that. You don't have to discuss it because you can't discuss it with anybody else, but just have a think. All behavior is a communication. What does that mean? Well, if I showed you this picture, that behavior is a communication, clearly. That young person is very unhappy, sorry. If I showed you this picture, this young person is getting quite loud and aggressive, and that's a communication that they're feeling unhappy as well. And this young person also is feeling very aggressive and probably in somebody's face, but it is a communication because it is about, I can't cope with this situation, therefore I'm going to get angry. And I'm going to explain that to you as we go forward and what that looks like. So social emotional mental health, what is it? Well, it used to be called behavior, okay, behavior, emotional, social difficulty. It's associated with attachment and early childhood trauma. It's associated with speech and language and communication needs. It's associated with ADHD, with ODD, which is opposition defiance disorder, and also autism spectrum condition. Where are all these things coming from? Why are they growing? Why are schools struggling to manage them? And why are coaches in the community games, whether it be rugby, cricket, or whatever, coming across more issues? Well, if we look at education and what's happened within education, okay, pressures in education mean that things have changed, okay, and basically the advent of school league tables with performance management stuff in schools, actually young people who were catered for previously are no longer being catered for and are being pushed out of the education system into either alternative provisions or into special schools, or just not in school at all. So those sorts of things that are coming from central government, which is looking at driving standards, doesn't give young people who have issues around managing their own behavior a chance to succeed. And I'm going to explain why that might happen from a young person's point of view going forward. So if we look at attachment, and what's attachment? Well, attachment is really important, and it's about how you are supported by the adults around you in your early life. So you can see here, really a good, a nice photograph, caring hug, etc. This young person here has got an attachment to something else rather than the adult. Sorry, my slides are running and I don't know why. I'll stop them. This young person's got an attachment to a toy as opposed to another human being. And this young person here doesn't want to be in this embrace, in this hug here. Quite clearly, there's something going on where they are not attached. And what I'm going to talk to you about is sensitive, because early childhood trauma, and when we talk about trauma, it's about how we are treated by the adults around us, can cause the brain to grow in a way that means that our behavior is not good. And I'm going to talk to you through that in a second when we get to the brain bit. So what is attachment? Pre-birth, the baby is already attaching to the sound and rhythm of mum. Okay, so mum's voice, and when we look at brain growth in a minute, what we will find is that the limbic brain, the emotional brain, grows through mum singing, soothing to her child while still in the womb in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. What the sound and rhythm of her heart, the sound of her voice, helps grow that emotional brain. Okay, if the heart rhythm is erratic because there maybe mum is subject to other things like domestic violence, then that can cause issues going forward. From the moment a child is born, they're completely dependent on their ability to attach to their parent. Okay, and what that means is that when a child is born, generally a midwife will put skin-to-skin contact in place, both for dad and mum. Okay, that's really important. The brain is wired to attach because without attaching to the adult, the baby won't survive. So we're wired into a position where we need to attach to the adult so that we can get food, sustenance, and warmth, which keeps us alive. And just have a think about this. Anybody know how long it is before a baby can imitate a mother by poking her tongue out? Well, the answer is 14 hours, because the baby associates mum's face, okay, really important that they need to associate, take an image of mum's face, and then from there, okay, what they do is they know who the feeder is going to be. So growing the emotional brain is really important. So let's look at how the brain develops. So from the 25th day, if we look at this picture, you've got 25 days, 50 days, 100 days, right up to 40 weeks here at full term. From 25 days on, the brain stem begins to develop. Why might that be? What is the function of the brain stem? Let's have a think about that. So the brain stem builds, the rest of the brain forms. It's not joined up at 40 weeks, but bits of it are in place. So brain stem, and then midbrain, and then cortex at the top. So let's look at triune brain theory, really simple brain theory here. Okay, so the brainstem sometimes gets called the reptilian brain or instinctual dinosaur brain because it's the oldest part of the brain. Okay, what it does is it sits on top of the central nervous system. Okay, and it takes in all aspects of all our senses. So sight, sound, taste, smell, hearing, all come through the brainstem. Above that, the next bit of the brain to grow is the limbic brain, which is our emotional feeling brain, which I've said to you will grow from the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. And above that is our rational thinking brain, or our neocortex. So what happens if the brain is interrupted in its growth, and why might it be interrupted in its growth?
Well, let's brain scans.
Sorry.
We talk about love, care, and nurture developing the brain.
Sorry, I've got a bit of a problem with my PowerPoint, but we'll skip on from it. So if we look at this slide here, okay, the slide on the left-hand side is a 14-year-old brain scan. You can see this bit here that I'm circling my mouse around is the brain stem. The bit in the middle is the limbic brain, the emotional brain, and then we've got the cortex, prefrontal cortex here, which is our rational thinking brain. This is also a 14-year-old brain, but this is a child from the Romanian orphanages who wasn't given any love, care, and nurture. And as a result of not being given any love, care, and nurture, the limbic emotional brain is not grown, and the rational thinking brain is not grown because the reptilian stem of the brain dominates. And what does that mean in terms of the young people that you might be coaching in a cricket club? Well, hopefully you'll never coach somebody who is as badly impaired as this, but you may coach young people who have been subject to trauma. And what that trauma may have been is the pandemic and the anxiety and the mental health of other adults around them, or neglect or domestic violence that's occurred in the household. And what that does is it causes the limbic brain to lack growth, and it causes the reptilian brainstem to predominate. Okay, that can make people feel very vulnerable because they become hypervigilant. Right, there's a video coming now that will give you some explanation from some children on what that looks like when we talk about behavior.
We are going to tell you about our brains. Our brain has 3 parts. The front bit is called the prefrontal cortex. It helps us to think, analyse, be reasonable, rational, and reflect on stuff. Some people call this the upstairs brain. This middle bit is called the limbic brain. It looks after our emotions, memory, and relationships. This back bit is the most primitive brain. It makes sure we breathe, poo and wee, and helps our heartbeat, and has the threat response inside it. Some people call that the downstairs brain. When we get frightened, our brain stem acts and makes us flight, fight, or freeze. Hormones, which are cortisol and adrenaline, start pumping around our body. And that makes us full of energy and strength. So we wiggle, fiddle, giggle, and we can't sit still. We also either flight, run, or we fight, which makes us get told off. Or we can freeze and look like we are not listening. But actually what is happening is that we are frightened and our body is trying to warn us and protect us. That's the bit that means we can think, reflect and be reasonable. And the bit that helps us talk. So that's why when we feel frightened, sometimes grown-ups think we are being naughty. So if we saw a big bear, we won't be able to stop and wonder what kind of bear it is, because then we'd be eaten. All our behaviour is actually communication, because no child wants to be thought of as naughty. Often we just feel frightened and we can't use our words because our brains are preoccupied and trying to survive.
Okay, so if we think about what those young people were saying there about when they get frightened, okay, people think they're being naughty, it's because of the way that the brain runs. Okay, so if I just flick us back to this slide here, okay, so if our senses are taking in a threat to us, which may be a coach shouting, it may be an adult standing over us, it may be some adults behaving in a way that just triggers us slightly because it replicates something that might have happened at home, then what happens is the rest of our brain goes offline. Inside the limbic brain, there are some glands called the amygdala, and the amygdala are the smoke alarms of the brain. And if young people have experienced trauma, what happens is the rest of the brain doesn't work. And I'm sure you can all think of really stressful situations that you've been in, whereby something's happened and somebody's asked you what had gone on and you cannot answer because you can't think straight. And that's because the blood drains from this top part of the brain in the cortex, drains down through the limbic system, and it goes to your heart and muscles so that you can fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, let's just move on now.
Yeah,
okay, so what type of coaching environment do you create? An honest question. Is it a very structured environment with lots of rules? Is it an environment in which children are just free to play? Is it a joyful environment? Because what we find very often is when things begin to melt down in a club scenario, very often what's going on for those young people is they just do not feel safe or they feel anxious. And obviously it's a complex situation having come through the pandemic because more young people are suffering with anxiety because of things that went on at home. We don't know what went on behind people's closed doors, but we know that many people have suffered as a result of the pandemic. And what we're seeing now is more anxious children. Now, since September the 1st, I've done 19 courses in primary schools dealing with de-escalation and managing children's behavior, whereas in previous years, I probably would have only done 2 or 3. So there's a massive need out there. And you know, the great news is that we can grow children's emotional brains through love, care, and nurture. And when I talk about love, I don't mean great big Hollywood love. I mean about caring for young people. I mean about establishing emotional connection and working out how we can support them best through encouraging them to be the best that they can be. Something that we work really hard on within the Bears Academy, close connection with the young people and encouraging them to be the best person they can be. So let's move on from that and think, okay, so what happens? What happens if your buttons are pushed? Are you able to say within your coaching setup, what pushes your buttons? What are the things that make you angry? Okay, because if children push your buttons and you show them that you have that they have pushed your buttons, the chances are your body language, your voice, your intonation will be showing them the signs of dominant adult, in which case they retreat and get more anxious again. Sometimes children use behavior to push adults' buttons because they're uncomfortable in the situation in which they're in. Now, many of the young people that I taught and looked after in Taunton in the school I was in ended up there because they learned behaviours to push adults' buttons that meant they ended up being excluded from school. And I'll give you a really simple example. Most of them had really poor literacy levels. So when they'd gone into primary school and had been asked to do quite a lot of literacy work, it was easier to throw the books on the floor or turn the table over. And then the teacher's focus was on the books and the table, not on the literacy issue. And therefore, that behavior worked for them. It got them out of an uncomfortable situation. And that meant that they ended up being excluded from school and ending up with me. But here's a stat for you that's really, really important for you to know. It takes on average 400 repetitions to grow one neuron. So if we think about growing a neuron as acquiring a skill, so whether that be catching a ball, whether that be, holding the bat in the right way, whether that be grooving a stroke, it takes 400 repetitions to grow that one synapse in the brain, unless it's done with play, in which case it takes between 10 and 20 repetitions. Now that doesn't apply to skill, but it does apply to emotional regulation. Okay, so this study has come from Dr. Karen Purvis at the Harvard Medical School, where actually they worked out that play for small children is the way that they feel comfortable and the way that they can grow themselves. So really, really important that the brain grows through play, because that is what gives us resilience. So if we're growing through play, that means our emotional brain is growing, and if our emotional brain grows, it can then calm down the brainstem when we get into those scenarios around flight, fright, and freeze. When we see behavior, what we see is something a bit like this anger iceberg. Okay, what we see is the anger on the top, but what we have to be aware of is that there's loads more going on underneath. And what we say is that behavior is a communication of an underlying need. And if we think about it from that point of view, if we're able to work out what the need is and satisfy that need, or calm that need down, or reassure the young person, then actually we can manage the anger. But for some of us, we get our buttons pushed, and what then happens is we go into flight, fright, freeze as well. And what then tends to happen is we go into shouty adult, and shouty adult will reinforce the problem for the young person. So really important that, coaches stay calm, regulated, and are able to talk to young people quietly, as opposed to the big crowd control voice. Because for many young people in front of you, they will be struggling from the issues that we've discussed. Okay, so let's have a think about what is trauma. So trauma is a psychologically distressing event that is outside the range of usual human experience, often involving a sense of fear, or terror, or helplessness. That's by Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry, who has just written an outstanding book with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You? So, very often when we face a young person who does something wrong, okay, we might say, what's wrong with you? Well, actually, they're spinning it on its head, because what I've just told you about the growth of the brain and understanding trauma, we need to go back to what happened to you, because very often a young person's behavior is related to things that have gone on in their past. Levine says trauma happens when any experience stuns us like a bolt from the blue. It overwhelms us, leaving us altered and disconnected from our bodies. Any coping mechanisms we have had are undermined, and we feel utterly helpless and hopeless, as if our legs have knocked out from under us. A simple way of thinking about it is trauma is anything that happens too much, too fast, too soon for the body to process. And then what we get is challenging behavior. And challenging behavior occurs when the demands and expectations being placed upon a child outstrip the skills he has to or she has to respond adaptively. Okay, and the impact of all of that, the impact of trauma, is widespread. It can have impact on physical health, sleep, eating disorders, etc., on our emotions we've already talked about, on relationships, whether we can grow relationships or not, on mental health, and we'll come back to that in a second, clearly on behavior and all those things that are listed underneath it, and on brain development, okay? And cognition, our learning, is impacted because we can't concentrate for long enough to be able to embed that learning. So we are adult role models, and how we relate to children is crucial. We have the ability to grow them or crush them with the words that we use. Now, how many of our coaching scenarios are like this, and how often have we seen stuff like this where it's not been challenged? And certainly it's something that we are really focused on and challenging within the game to make sure that both adults, parents and spectators are involved in positive messages as opposed to negative messages. Don't know if any of you have seen this video, but Ian Wright was somebody who suffered with trauma, and that manifested itself later in his sports career when he emerged playing for Crystal Palace when he was a very angry young man. One of the things that we know is that having an emotionally available adult is a key to helping you grow emotionally. And sometimes when your parents don't give you that emotional availability, it can come from somewhere else. Have a watch of this video.
Ian's still the highest scoring striker ever to play for Arsenal, and he owes a lot to the man who first taught him to kick a ball, his old school teacher, Sid Pigden.
As I haven't seen him for, what, 23, 24 years, so he would now be expecting me to be 6 feet under, I would think. I don't actually think, he probably won't recognise me because he won't believe it's me. Hello, Ian. Long time no see. Mr. Pigden. You're alive. I'm alive, he says. How are you doing? I can't believe this. Someone said you was dead. As you see, I'm very patient, and I'm so glad you've done so well with yourself.
He was so supportive all the time. He kind of like had me as his kind of like special guy. I don't know what to say. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. You know, now I realise how important he was in my life. The first main imposing figure, male figure in my life who was trying to guide me on the right road.
How far are we going back now? 40 years, 30 years anyway.
He's 30 or 32 years.
Yeah.
So interestingly, Ian Wright's produced some programs recently looking at the domestic violence that was going on in his household, whereby mum's partner used to punish him by taking him into the front room on a Saturday when Match of the Day started and making him face the wall so that he could listen to the music but wasn't allowed to watch the program. Mum, who was obviously caring for Ian and his brothers, actually sided with the male adult in the house as opposed to caring and sticking up for the kids. And there was a huge amount of domestic violence that went on, both between the two adults, but also towards the children as well. And whilst Ian is reconciled with his mother now, actually he sees Sid Pigden, the adult who made the difference for him. Really important that we, and many of you will have experienced this already, for those older coaches on this call, where there will be young people who have been through your club, where they say the sport was their salvation, and maybe you as the coach were their salvation. And it's important that we spread that message far and wide, that one emotional available adult can help a young person grow emotionally to be able to manage the trauma that they've been through. Without that, what we see is increased mental health issues. So pre-pandemic, we were told that 50% of mental health issues were embedded by the age of 14 and 75% by the age of 17. And the one thing that makes a difference, as we've talked about, is emotionally available adult. an emotionally available adult who can make sure that you grow emotionally to be able to manage the difficulties in which you face. Okay, so just moving on. What we're going to do now is we're going to think about ADHD. So we've talked about SEMH. One of the things about ADHD is that many of the aspects of ADHD present themselves in the same way that social emotional mental health does. ADHD is mainly due to some chemicals lacking in the brain, and many of our young people are medicated and therefore are able to manage their behavior through medication, and others less so because the medication wears off, or they don't like taking it because it causes them to not sleep or not eat. And many ADHD children are underweight because of the appetite suppressor that they take, which is part of the medication. I'm going to play you an audio clip now of a guy who specializes with ADHD at UK, who is a sufferer himself, but he helps explain it.
Hi, I'm Max Davey, ADHD specialist and person with ADHD, and I wanted to make this quick video just to explain what I think ADHD is. For people, maybe older children or adults who are thinking about whether it fits with them, and also whether maybe you have been told you have ADHD and you weren't really sure what the person meant. I'm going to start from two facts. One is that everyone's brain is different, and that's wonderful. The second is that you are not your brain. And this second one needs a bit more getting your head around, really. But we all walk around in our brains, and they're not completely under our control. So our attention could wander, or we could find ourselves doing or thinking something without quite realizing it. And that's true of everyone, but especially true of people with ADHD. One of the most popular analogies about ADHD is that having an ADHD brain is like having a car with a really powerful engine, but with bicycle brakes. And I often add in a bicycle handlebar. So it's very fast and speedy and powerful, but the steering and the stopping aren't so good. And that analogy is fine, but for me, a car is not a living organism. Our brains are living organisms, and actually they have kind of minds of their own in a funny way. So I think of more of riding around on a dinosaur, which is a nice image, because we all know different sorts of dinosaurs. We've all learned about them, and that goes back to the different brains thing. So some people's brains are herbivores. They're very steady and sedate and meticulous and all those things, and that's fine. It's just not us. The ADHD brain is ravenous. It wants stimulation all the time. It wants emotions. It wants always to be moving around, because movement is a kind of stimulation. So this ravenous brain, I call a T-Rex brain, a Tyrannosaurus Rex brain. It's a great brain to have in lots of ways, but sometimes it gets us into trouble. And in the next video, I'll talk about why it can get us into trouble and when we start to think about diagnosis.
Okay, so you can imagine being inside a brain that has ADHD, where things just have to happen really quickly. And if you get a young person in a coaching scenario who has ADHD, they're the ones who are running around. You just can't stop them. And what you need to be able to give them is very short, focused tasks, because without those short, focused tasks, they'll just carry on going like a spinning top. And therefore, you know, it's an interesting exercise. A number of adults who now are being diagnosed with ADHD that didn't ever really realize that they had it, but knew that they were different in some way. And ADHD can be really beneficial for sportsmen, but it can also obviously be incredibly frustrating for coaches trying to coach somebody who is out of control to a certain extent. And that's that idea of being in a really fast car with a really powerful engine, but not being able to steer it properly or stop it. So yeah, ADHD, really complex, but it manifests itself and presents itself sometimes in the same way that social emotional mental health does. So let's just think about, just a recap from what I've talked about already. The most important bit as far as understanding and managing somebody who has behavior issues and or ADHD is that bit about connection before correction. Okay, that bit around establishing the relationship and the way that we put our boundaries and limits around the young person are really important. We don't jump to correction straight away. We try and connect with them. We try and understand where they're coming from, so that we can make a difference for them and that they feel that we trust them. So my journey to understanding, just really simple. Okay, so 11 years ago, sorry, longer than that, 2010 was 11 years ago. I was seconded by the local authority to run a special school, having been in mainstream all my time. I was a behaviour expert, so say a behaviour lead across Bristol local authority. And I waltzed into this special school thinking that I was going to be able to cope and manage with everybody. And actually, what I realised was all the strategies that I had went completely out the window. And I started reading. So this book, The Little Book of Big Stuff About Your Brain, by Dr. Andrew Curran, is a really great book to start with. It's got very large writing, okay, and lots of diagrams. So from a PE point of view or a sports coach point of view, it's probably one of the better books to pick up. But it'll give you a real understanding about how brains work and how they form. It's not a specialist book at all. It's for everybody. You might learn stuff about yourself reading it. I certainly did. And it just gives you the ability to think, right, okay, when I'm coaching, maybe I need to think about this from this point of view. And a quote from Curran says, understand the human in front of you, then you will improve their self-esteem. If you do this, you will improve their self-confidence. If you do that, they will feel more emotionally engaged with what you are doing. Now, from a coaching point of view, that's gold dust. Okay, if you can get somebody to understand what you're trying to achieve with them and you can grow their self-confidence, that's absolutely gold dust. So one of Curran's other great quotes is that you can only be as old as your emotional brain is old. And sometimes when a child has been through a traumatic event and has social emotional mental health issues or ADHD, what we actually see is a toddler brain inside a teenage body. And what we deal with is the teenager in front of us as opposed to the toddler. Another book, A Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, a bit more specialist from a psychologist's point of view, but shows how you can make a difference. The emotional brain continues to grow until the end of adolescence. So in women, that's about 20. I'm 57, I'll let you know when the mind's finished growing. But in truth, probably about 25, late 20s, as far as men are concerned. And therefore, you can make changes, okay? And this quote from Perry, the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely he or she will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. And this book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Bessel van der Kolk investigated PTSD in servicemen from the Korean and Vietnam War. And what he realized was when young people were distressed and showing behaviors, that actually they were showing exactly the same behaviors as PTSD. So three different books, but all with an aspect that you can all learn from as far as developing relationships and developing your understanding of young people is concerned. So just remember, relationships are everything. Being an adult who is warm, engaging, patient, and offers repetitive, rewarding relationship experiences will eventually change the neural pathways of a traumatized child and will enable them to learn, relate to others, and have dreams for their future. Okay, right, where are we? Stop share. Right, loads and loads of quite detailed stuff there. I expect your brains are fizzing a little bit, but open to questions. You probably sat there thinking, God, that was a bit complicated. What's that got to do with cricket? But actually, if you come back to the heart of what I was talking about right back at the very beginning, the way that you help young people make progress is through connection, right? If you can connect to them, if you can make that emotional connection, you have more chance of them being successful going forward. All right. And I was listening to a podcast today from England Rugby made by Joe Marler. who talks about his mental health issues that he has faced in the last 5-10 years, and how, you know, he would never have got into the game if the coaches who coached him at a media and junior level didn't have the patience to manage him. He could quite easily have been expelled from the game early on. So, you know, invaluable. Please feel free to come off mic. Hannah, yeah, I'll give you the book title again in a second, but come off mics and ask me questions, please, because otherwise I've just been looking at my own screen, not realizing you were all there. It's a horrible way to present. No, please feel free to ask anything you want and fire away. Hannah, the book I said was The Little Book of Big Stuff About the Brain by Dr. Andrew Curran.
Okay, well, can I just ask, I'm not sure it's Roger Wilmot from Winscombe. I'm not sure it's a question exactly, but I think quite a lot of what you said puts me in mind of something that Harry Redknapp, I think, was credited as sort of being his sort of coaching approach, which was to be, I think, relentlessly positive about players and tell them how good they were. And, you know, I think players sort of said, when he told you that once, he'd go and tell you it again every day, just to, you know, keep that confidence growing and growing and growing. And I think, you know, he's not necessarily my idea of the best coach, but in terms of a motivation, I think that's really good.
The only thing I would say about that is kids see through a lack of genuineness. Does that make sense? That word genuineness. If you're not genuine, they'll see through it. All right. And actually it'll undermine the process. So actually, you know, you've got to be a really good actor with some of them, I know. But absolutely, you know, positivity is the key to everything, isn't it? You know, if you are a positive person, people will follow you, right? Providing you can back it up with the way that you communicate with them.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi there, it's Nathan and Will from Bridgewater.
I was just about to call you Paula, Nathan. I'm pleased it's Nathan.
Sorry, it always comes up on the wife's login. I do apologise. Many thanks for that. Fantastic, lovely presentation. Explained a great deal for us as well. Going back with the coaching thing, it's very difficult. I've sat here with my son, who I sort of watched grow up and play football, which is a passionate dislike of mine. From an early age, it's very difficult sometimes to go back when you've seen many coaches over the year just shouting, getting louder, getting more aggressive with youngsters, and it's just such a frustrating thing and a very difficult tide to turn when you've watched it in other sports. And I've seen it firsthand, like I said, with my little lad, not so much little lad. Hang on, my dog's just going mad as well.
Don't worry.
That's quite a difficult tide to turn with a lot of youngsters who've come from different backgrounds, already almost brainwashed into the fact that the coach is going to have their way, say their piece, and it's going to put them back in a box if they don't perform. You know, it's a terrible thing to see.
Yeah, well, you know, I very much like yourself get frustrated with football because the laws of the game, or the rules of the game, I should say, in football, are there to manage behaviour on the pitch, as far as the way that players communicate to the referee and the way that the coaches and managers communicate with the referee as well. But it's never used.
That's right.
And therefore it encourages a culture, you know, and certainly I think that you know, I know many very, very good football coaches. You know, interestingly, I'm doing a similar presentation to this to the Bristol City Community Foundation in a week or so, and it'll be interesting to get their responses. But I know many coaches, you know, we just talked about Harry Redknapp just now, who will put their arm around players and talk to them quietly and grow them as individuals. But too many mini and junior coaches in the junior game, okay, are about themselves, not about the kids.
Yeah.
You know, if there's something I know about cricket, it's that you're all absolutely invested in your clubs and you love your sport. Okay. For many adults getting involved in football, I find it not the same.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and that's quite difficult then when they come from playing football for 8 months of the year and turn up at
into a cricket environment. Absolutely,
like April, May is a very different feel to the whole setup, and that's, you know, trying to be objective about it. It just has a very different feel to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But anyway, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you, Nathan. John, how are you, mate?
Very well, thank you. Rich, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
From your experience of England rugby, as a group of cricket coaches on the call, where can we go and see great practice to develop what you presented tonight, to see it live in action?
Okay, so I run a centre for Bristol Bears Academy at Weston on a Monday night from 6 till 8. Any of you can come to Weston-super-Mare, to the Loxton campus of Weston College, to come and see how we coach. Okay, we are an inclusive academy. We don't select children; they are nominated. We keep them with us, you know. So that's one place you could come. I would recommend Russell Earnshaw. Okay, to the work of the Magic Academy of Russell Earnshaw and John Fletcher. If you're not aware of it, the Magic Academy is a online coaching academy where you can pick up all sorts of different tips, mainly based around rugby, but they work a lot with England hockey. Okay, and I'm going to send Steve a couple of links to other podcast stuff that I've done around mental health. So there's some bits and pieces of that on the RFE website, but also with Rusty on the Magic Academy website as well. So that I hope you can see how some of the stuff that I've just talked to you about, if it's not addressed, and we have the ability to address it within our community clubs, if it's not addressed, it can lead to mental health issues down the road. All right, because what we see is, if a young person cannot manage their behavior and they don't learn to manage their behavior, we get this concept called social thinning, where actually people begin to move away from them, both their family and their friends. And that's how guys end up sleeping in doorways in Taunton, you know, because actually they've got no family because of the way that they've behaved around people. Then that pushes people away. And that concept of social thinning is something that's really, really important that we understand. So it's why we need to do the piece of work right back at the very beginning, when we can make a difference. Anybody else you wanted me to say?
No, that was brilliant. I think it's just, for me, it's been a really fascinating webinar, and it's just the next stage, so where people can go and learn and be a sponge and just take more information on. So I'm sure there'll be guys and girls on the call that just want to explore it now. Yeah.
So in action, you know, I live it in the way that I coach, and you'll see other coaches doing exactly the same as well. You know, freedom to play, little words in ears and stuff like that, as opposed to a structured session. But the work of the Magic Academy is really important about how we incentivize kids to perform. So, you know, Rusty's famous for his flip chart. So he'll go to a session and he'll say to the kids, first of all, he'll put some stuff on the flip chart, and he'll say to the kids, if you manage to get this number of passes linked together in this movement, the coaches have to do 50 press-ups. Well, that's a bit turning it on its head, isn't it? You know, how often does the coach say, you drop that ball, you're doing 50 press-ups? Well, actually, the incentive's the other way around. Get the adults involved in doing the bloody exercise, because they're the ones stood around most of the time. You know, but little things like that you can just pick up that give you a different way of thinking around coaching and encouraging people to move forward. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to send Steve some links, okay, of other things that you can listen to pick up. As I said earlier, I'm also the mental health and wellbeing ambassador for the GRFU, and this links into obviously mental health in later life. And there's a webinar that's taped and on the GRFU website, which you can watch free of charge. And I'll put you in touch with other people that you can listen to around stuff like this. It will help you develop coaching and hopefully develop your club so that it's as inclusive as can possibly be.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Rich. I've just put in the chat box, everyone, just an evaluation form. Before you leave this evening, if you can just hover over that link and just click it, that should hopefully take you direct to the evaluation form, and your thoughts and feedback will be very welcome. I agree with all the comments in the chat box. Fantastic presentation. Thank you for that, Rich. And I will certainly take away that quote, that correction or connection before correction. Just as a parent, we have to go back you think, well, spend a bit of time thinking about that. So thank you very much. That was very enlightening. And
just some language around, talking to kids when they get it wrong. If you use the acronym WINE, which I'm sure all of you can remember, okay. I wonder, I imagine, I noticed, and the E is for empathy, not sympathy. So I wonder why you behave like that. I imagine that was really difficult to handle. I noticed that you did this. Why did you do that? As opposed to what we would generally do is, why have you done that? What did you do that for? And that puts a child on a back foot. Whereas if you wonder about it and you imagine about it, you're taking yourself out of that controlling adult situation. Nugget to leave you with.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Rich. That was very enlightening. And please do send across any resource, and I'll share them with with everyone else, and share the recording so people can refresh it as well. And
great,
that'd be brilliant.
Good.
Appreciate your time.
No worries.
Very beneficial.
Take care, everybody. Enjoy the weather. I'm sure it's growing your cricket pitches.